Good morning, everyone. My name is Bev Da Costa, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar brought to you by ORT and ORT Cape. ORT Cape is an education NGO that focuses on training and support of teachers in disadvantaged schools and communities. ORT facilitates business growth through training, networking, and mentorship for entrepreneurs and small businesses. To find out more about what our organizations do, please visit our websites. Lisa will post the link in the chat. Today, I have pleasure in introducing our renowned speaker, Michael Bagram. Michael is a graduate of Rhodes University with a BA in political science, as well as an LLB. He is a labor law expert, a member of parliament, and advises corporations on the restructuring and management of their labor forces. There will be time for questions after the presentation, so please post these in the chat, and then please remember to remain on mute throughout. Thank you, Michael, for your time this morning. We're looking forward to an informative session.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, everyone, for coming in and listening at this early time on a cold morning, but it's spring, so everyone's happy and excited. What I'm looking at, and let's place it in context immediately as to where we are with the COVID-19 vaccination and the world of work. During the last 6 months, obviously, there's been some regulations, some argument, there's some issues that have arisen, but as at September 21, we haven't had any court cases, we've had very little arbitration awards. So what we're doing is we're extrapolating from the regulations, from the statements put out by our president, by the Minister of Employment and Labour, and indeed the Department of Employment and Labour put out regulations. So bear with me, I can't give you exact answers to some of the questions that might arise, and I'm going to show you now during the course of this discussion what lawyers are trying to do to navigate their way around the vexed question of vaccination. Obviously, the main issue now is employers are saying that they want their staff vaccinated. Some employers are saying that they're making it compulsory. Others are saying that if we can't accommodate you in a situation where you don't come in touch with others and you refuse to be vaccinated, then we're going to dismiss you. So those are the issues that I want to talk about now. Let's just go backwards a little bit. The Constitution. The Constitution is absolutely clear. You cannot be forced to be vaccinated. There is bodily integrity throughout the basis of the Constitution. The golden thread running through the Constitution in South Africa is simple, that we have individual rights, and those individual rights have to be respected. So everything we talk about has to be in line with the Constitution. Secondly, people will remember there are no less than 3 occasions in the family chats that President Ramaphosa had with us. I hate that word, but anyway, when he had those family chats, my fellow South Africans, those chats were reassuring in the sense that the president said you will not be forced to have a vaccination. So in light of those, the Constitution and the presidential discussions, people obviously have come forward and said, I know what my rights are. And of course, they certainly do know what their rights are. Now, it gets a little bit murky because the trade unions are also saying that if any employer, and COSATU has put out a statement, they put out a statement 2 weeks ago. If anyone's interested in seeing their statement, I'm happy to send it to you. But they put out a statement which didn't get all that much press, saying that if any employer dismisses anyone who refuses to be vaccinated, they will take them to task and bring the business to a standstill. A heavy threat, and we're going to see a lot of that over the next few months as businesses start putting together codes of good practice. What I'm hoping to see as a result of this discussion is that those of you who are in human resources or management of businesses, that in fact you do develop your own code of good practice with regard to vaccination. This COVID-19 is not going away. It's going to be with us, I think, for years. I think the vaccination issue will be repeated next year and the year thereafter, but like the flu vaccine. I'm not a medical expert, and I certainly can't tell you whether the vaccine's good for you or bad for you. And I don't intend to get into that debate. I'm the wrong person to discuss that. Speak to Suzanne Vosloo rather. But if you want to know about the world of work, I've got a lot of experience in that. So in essence, what I'm trying to outline to employers right now is that you can, as an employer, in terms of the codes that have been put out by the Department of Employment and Labor, you can insist on a vaccination under certain circumstances. And that's the devil. The devil is in the detail. When can you insist? How can you insist? And when do you draw the line saying you won't have a vaccination? Well, then please leave. And that's the issue. And you need a policy. You need to start consulting with the staff. If you unionize, consult with the union. If you have a workplace forum, consult with that forum. Now, in essence, you need to first investigate your operational requirements. As a business, you have operational requirements. So let me put it in simple terms, and I'll give you a few examples of this. But for instance, if you are a restaurant, your staff can't work virtually. Well, very few can. Maybe the bookkeeper can. But the waiters can't work virtually. They can't say that we'll take orders over the internet and then send it in. It doesn't work like that. That's not the operation that you have in a restaurant. Someone phoned me about the tea lady who didn't want to be vaccinated, and the other staff complained. Well, she can't work virtually, obviously. And so if there's no other alternative position for that person who can't work virtually, then you've got a problem. You've got the conundrum. You need to then inquire from that individual why. And that also becomes an issue and a debate. And so let's go backwards a little bit. I had an issue, and probably going to land up at an arbitration in due course, where a senior, and well, names won't be known, it's still, they're still debating whether they can try and settle this, but a senior buyer at a retail operation has to purchase the next season's footwear, and part of that operational requirement is that she would then travel to Italy and France. And those trips are now coming up in November. And we all know that if you're going to travel to Italy and France, you're going to have to show that you've had the vaccination. And you need proof. And she has refused. She's refused on one of the good grounds that we'll discuss just now. And we now have to have that debate. She's not refusing on a spurious ground. That, in other words, she's not saying that I've just got a feeling in my water that I mustn't take the vaccination. She's got a good ground. Not medical, but she's looking at it from a religious point of view. And so we then have to engage and consult and say, well, it's an operational requirement. We can't use you, and especially in the highly paid position that you have, we can't use you in any alternative position. And we're certainly not going to rely on you doing this over the internet and over social media and whatever else she's proposed. We need people to go there. We need you to engage with the sellers, with the manufacturers. We need you to feel the goods, to have a look, to engage with other buyers from other countries. And that to us is the value of having you. We could have anyone, we can have Joe Soap sitting here and going on the internet and saying, these are nice shoes and that's what we'll buy for our next rain. That's not why she was employed. She has put together a platform as to why she can do her job properly over the internet and doesn't need to travel. And we've said, no, we're going to make your job redundant. And for operational requirements, we took a decision to retrench and not dismiss, but to retrench, dismiss for operational requirements. In other words, through a no-fault exercise. She had a religious reason. We got a letter from the priest, and we fully understand that that's what she believes. And we fully understand that it's not a reason that she's made up out of thin air. She is a religious lady. That being said, if she had come and said, I don't want to take the vaccination because they're going to implant a microchip into my brain, we're not going to take that as a legitimate reason, and we're going to have to wait for court cases to tell us what is legitimate and what isn't. But at the moment, we can extrapolate from other legislation, other court cases, that if they're going to insert a microchip into a brain, that's not a good reason. It sounds like poppycock, and therefore we're going to dismiss, not retrench. We will have a hearing and we'll dismiss because we don't believe that's a no-fault exercise. Okay, so let's just go to the theory that I'm trying to outline. The first part of the theory is clear. You must have an operational requirement in your particular business as to why that individual or individuals must be present, and you should consult, not negotiate, consult with your staff or staff representatives as to that policy. Once you have that policy in place, there will be exceptions to the policy. In other words, Michael Bagraim is an attorney. He's got diabetes, which I have got, and I've got all sorts of comorbidities, and I don't want to take a vaccination. I'll tell you, I did take one, so I'm biased, but let's say I don't want to take one. My office can't have an operational requirement at this stage for me to have the vaccination, and I'll tell you why. I sit here in my little office alone. I work almost 100% of the day on Microsoft Teams and Zoom and other platforms that are provided to me. I run arbitrations at least 3 or 4 times a week, and I do that on the virtual platform as well. And I attend parliamentary meetings on the Zoom platform. And the chances of me seeing anyone during the day is almost nil. Very seldom do I see anyone, let alone another attorney or even clients. They don't come anymore, and I am busier than I've ever been in my life because, of course, retrenchment is high. So the operational requirements of Bagram's attorneys can't exist at this stage. I'm not intending to travel anywhere abroad. Most of my internal travel in the country has come to an end, despite the fact that I was traveling to arbitrations at least once a week in the country. All the various platforms are now offering virtual, and it becomes so much easier, cheaper, and quicker for the clients. And so we don't have a policy in Bagram's attorneys because we don't have the operational requirements expecting you to do it. But now I have clients, and all my clients are explaining their operational requirements, and you need to respect it. One of them is, and this is a difficult one, is productivity. In other words, you've got a bookkeeper, and the bookkeeper can quite happily do the work at home, but somehow it's not getting done. Now, that you can expect that person to then come back to work because you're just not happy about it, and that's an operational requirement, and I'm absolutely happy that that would be a good operational requirement. And if that bookkeeper comes up with a reason as to why not, and let's say it's a good reason, and there are basically 3 reasons. One is health. In other words, your doctor has given you a certificate saying you shouldn't have it, you're on warfarin or whatever, and you shouldn't have it. I don't know if anyone else has experienced it, but when you go for your vaccination, the nurse should be asking you, are you taking this, or have you got any reason as to why you shouldn't have the vaccination? If you say yes, and you give the reason, and they say, well, I can't give it to you, your doctor will probably give you a certificate saying you can't have the vaccination. That's a good reason. Your priest, your rabbi, your imam, your sangoma might actually also give you a letter saying our sect or whatever doesn't allow vaccinations. It's also a good reason because it's your belief. And then finally, bodily integrity is a bit more difficult, a bit more amorphous, and that you must weigh up as well. Once you've weighed up those 2 factors, the 2 factors, as you know, it's the issue of your operational requirements and the issue of your good reason. Once you've weighed up all that, then you would expect the person to come. If there is still a good reason, that's my second hand, that the person got a good reason, but your operational requirements override the good reason, and they can. You're running a business after all. They can override the good reason. If that operational requirement is of such a nature that you believe that you're not going to get the best out of that particular employee, or they won't be able to perform their function in accordance with your requirements, you would then make a decision whether you're going to dismiss or retrench. And I don't believe that the courts are going to step in and say you couldn't do that. You still, as an employer, have that right to say that I need you to have this particular qualification and I need you to come in to work. Now, if a person says, I'm not going to vaccinate, but I'm coming to work anyway, don't worry about it. Well, you've got a particular problem there as well, because that person might be putting others at risk. We don't know yet, the medical science hasn't shown us, but for instance, if someone's not vaccinated, they might get sicker than the person who has been vaccinated, and they might be a super spreader or something, I don't know. And we're waiting for the medical science to come back on that one. But in the meantime, it's absolutely acceptable for employers to say that I, as an employer, am insisting that you get vaccinated. Now, we had another very interesting example that I had a lot of fun with this, but it was strange. I have a client that is a small CMT operation out in Salt River, and they employ 16 people. And they then decided they're going to send their whole staff off to be vaccinated, and that they will make arrangements and people get paid for the day, and they'll make arrangements for everyone to go. And they went and approached everyone, explained their issue. Everyone said, that's fine, we haven't been vaccinated, and they went to go and get their first vaccination. 2 of the staff members did go with them and decided at the last minute they're not going to have the vaccination. And when the bus came back and everyone was chatting and talking about it, it became knowledge that 2 refused to have it. Although they went with them and they didn't give any reasons up front as to why they weren't having it, they just decided there and then. Maybe they chickened out or there was a problem with something like that. And the real issue then is, what now? Well, I tell you, that was taken out of the hands of the employer, and they phoned me immediately and I went around to see them. It was a very interesting discussion, and that was that the other 14 said that they refused to work with those 2 who hadn't been vaccinated. They said, first of all, they are scared that they'll come and carry some COVID-19 germs or virus or something to the work. I mean, you can't speak to people and tell them that, you know, look, just relax at the moment. It's not going to happen right now. But no, they decide they're not going to work, and they're down tools, saying they don't want those 2 there present. Immediately, the employer, now again, must understand that I'm also trying to keep my distance from people. So I said to the employer over the Zoom discussion that I believe there should be a discussion with those 2, possibly even face to face, and I'm happy to conduct that. I'll be on the Zoom platform. Well, they came in, those 2 couldn't give us very good reasons. They mumbled a bit about they think it's bad for them, and they couldn't give us any particular reason as to why they don't want it. And we explained that if they don't, we can give them another chance. If they don't have the vaccination, unfortunately, it might mean an end to the position, and it might mean an end to the job. And they took a decision, that particular factory, they'd rather retrench and give them a severance package of 1 week's pay per completed year of service, as opposed to, at that point, actually going into some sort of disciplinary inquiry. And it'll be interesting to see which way the courts interpret, whether you have to go to inquiry or you must retrench or what must you do. But they decided to do that. The one then relented and said that she was going to have the vaccination, which she did, and presented a certificate thereafter. And the one then said, if you would give me RX, a certain amount of money, I'll go anyway and I'll sign a full and final settlement. So that's what happened in that particular case. And of course, I'm standing at the moment thick in complaints from employers on various reasons. Everyone's phoning in or emailing me and saying that staff have raised certain issues, and those issues have become quite, I mean, it's innovative what's actually going on. And of course, every staff member that doesn't want to be vaccinated is giving very good reasons as to how they can do their job virtually, from obvious examples where they can't do their job virtually to some where they can, with employers saying, yes, we've been doing it virtually for the last year or so, but we want to actually get back to normality, and we find that our operational requirements are much better with you being at work. So the vaccination itself is an emotional issue. It's emotional for employers, it's emotional for customers, and all that sort of thing. But now we need to take into account, finally, and I see my time is running a little bit late, but now we need to take into account the operational requirements read against the occupational health and safety regulations in the country. Now, those regulations, and there's a golden thread that runs through those regulations and the law, is that you as the employer have a duty of care towards your staff. You have to ensure that everyone remains healthy and that the workplace is, to a large degree, COVID-19 regulation compliant. Now, up until now, because we didn't have the vaccination, the country seemed to have messed up on that one, but now we've got it. But up until now, before the vaccination was a real issue, what we insisted on was everyone wearing a mask, everyone sanitizing their hands, keeping their distance. As soon as you've got any comorbidity, announce that. As soon as you arrive with any symptoms, announce that. We send people off for testing, etc., etc. So we all were compliant with those regulations, which made us compliant with the occupational health and safety regulations. That's all we could do. We couldn't insist on vaccinations because we didn't have it. Now it's becoming freely available in the country. I think it's anyone over 18 now is entitled to get the vaccination, and there aren't long queues and long waits, etc., etc. All that's gone. And at least the country now, despite being 6 months late, is now getting that together. Now we've got to read the occupational health and safety regulations in line with the fact that you can get vaccinated. So now we've got another issue. Is that part of the new regulations? And we're waiting for the Minister of Employment and Labour to properly put into those regulations that, if at all possible, insist that the staff take a vaccination. And I think there's nothing in law that stops him from saying that. Bless him, Tulas Nkezi, our minister, is not exactly a fast mover, but I think he is getting that pressure from employers, and he's certainly getting that pressure from the Ministry of Health. He's got the pressure, on the other hand, from the trade unions who are saying no, and that's a real problem. I have seen some papers where people have issued court papers on behalf of employees who refuse to be vaccinated and have been dismissed. That's going to take a year, maybe 2 years before we can get some judgments out of it. But I'm actually very satisfied within my own mind that what I'm telling you, the courts will follow. I have spoken to no less than 7 Labour Court judges about the way that we'd have to structure it and what would satisfy them in due course. Obviously, they can't go on record and tell me that, but in discussions and over telephonic discussions and Zoom meetings, this is the message I'm getting from them, that they, despite their personal views, whether they're anti-vaxxers or pro-vaxxers, that's their issue. In terms of social media and anti-vaxxing, again, employers are starting to clamp down as well and saying, we don't want to be told about any of this. And you saw what happened with Dr. Vosloo. She did come out with an anti-vaxxer message, and her employers now taking disciplinary action against her, and probably will lead to quite severe action against her. And they're probably right. I don't think they're going to lose that particular case. You don't want to send a message out like that. Finally, just to say that you're going to find many employers and many people in the public who use those businesses are going to want to see that the staff have been vaccinated. They're going to want to see that you're offering a safe environment for them to do business or to attend there at the business place. And they don't want to know that you've got staff who refuse to be vaccinated and you haven't followed all the occupational health and safety regulations. So thank you for listening to me. I'm happy to answer any questions. But as I said, we don't have court cases. We don't have any finite judgments on this. But my belief very strongly is what I've just told you will hold in law. Thank you very much.
Michael, thank you for shedding light on this complex conversation. We do have a couple of questions in the chat box, so I'll run through them with you. The discussion around current employees seems to be quite clear. Can you ask if a person is vaccinated during a recruitment process and make it a condition of employment?
It's a great question, and I think it's a lot easier in those circumstances. Yes, are problems with people who are currently employed, because now you're changing the terms and conditions of employment, and I was focusing on that in this discussion. But a very good discussion then follows. Can you put it into your own operational requirements when you recruit? And yes, absolutely you can. And in fact, it's a lot easier. And the rights that employees have do extend to applications, because our labor law does give rights to an applicant, and those rights are similar to those of an employee. But once you've had that discussion internally, I would strongly suggest that people do put it into their operational requirements, and then on top of that, put it into their requirements for taking a job in the future. It's not going to help you, and it would be discriminatory if you've told your own staff, no, don't worry, you don't have to be vaccinated, but from going forward, everyone has to be. Because then you would have a problem trying to explain why you're discriminating against an applicant. But if you are, in fact, asking your own staff to have vaccination, I think it's a good idea and an excellent idea, in fact, to have it in your recruitment policy. I strongly believe that.
Thank you. If you have an employee who is front-facing, for example, a waiter or a tea lady, like you mentioned, and you insist for them to have the vaccination, can another employee who is not front-facing refuse? Sorry, I just have to, like the bookkeeper or a back office person who does not interact with others, i.e. for some, but not others in the same business.
Yeah, absolutely. You can do that, and it can be explained. Of course, the best case scenario is that all staff are equal and they should all have the vaccination, if that's the way you want to go. However, the issue is quite simple. You have to weigh it up, and the regulations at the moment are telling us you must weigh up your operational requirements against that particular staff member. So operational requirements are not the same for your receptionist as they would be for the bookkeeper who is working from home or working in a back room and never sees anyone. Or that Michael Bagram is stuck in his little office and speaks on Zoom and Microsoft all day. That would be very difficult to explain that the operational requirements are exactly the same. But then, of course, that bookkeeper must still have a good reason. They can't just say, well, I don't feel like it, because then they are causing that particular employer the trouble, which you've just outlined now. In other words, the waiter will say, but how come the bookkeeper doesn't have to? We're both people and we're both employed here. That's not fair. And so you've then got to be able to explain that it is fair in those circumstances, but there must be a good reason the bookkeepers come up with. The bookkeeper can't come up with the excuse that they're going to implant a special message into me or something of that nature. But of course, at the end of the day, and I see Son has put in, who happens to be my doctor, who keeps had to look after me while I had COVID. Yeah, everyone shares the same facilities. Not always true, because I don't, but yes, people do share the same facilities, and then you would have to explain that. Again, it becomes a juggling exercise with the individual itself. I know that many people, and you can see it all over town, especially in Johannesburg, I'm hearing from my colleagues from Johannesburg, and many people just aren't coming to work. They're conducting all their work virtually, and it looks like this might become the norm for the future, never mind COVID. From what I've inquired, and I do a lot of work in the Building Industry Bargaining Council, never mind COVID, they're going to run their arbitrations virtually from now on. It works out a lot cheaper for them, and all the users of that bargaining council have said that that's what we're going to do. So never mind COVID, never mind whatever it is, it's just cheaper everyone all around. And so they have taken their offices and sublet them and only need one or two. They don't need arbitration rooms anymore. So it looks like the reality is starting to change a little bit. But thank you for that.
I suppose it's causing a disruption in the way things are to the way things will be. Another question has come through. What dismissal route would you follow though? Retrenchment or incapacity?
Well, yeah, there's lots of, and this is where it becomes murky because we don't have court cases, we don't have decision. I reckon what you must do is as fair as possible. And that's what I've been following. I've been following a retrenchment exercise because the reality is the person can't perform the function that I need them to perform. And if they've got a good reason, then it's for no fault of their own. So the retrenchment is a no fault exercise. Let's take an example, nothing to do with COVID. Let's take an example that I have a driver who delivers our documents. Some institutions still insist on documents properly served, and as lawyers we have to go and deliver documents, etc. And that's what the driver does. He's not qualified to do anything else. That's what he does. He drives and he delivers documents, goes to fetch items for us, etc. If on the weekend he gets drunk, he gets caught in a roadblock and they take his license away, what do we do in those circumstances? Well, there's a fault and he's had his license taken away. I would dismiss him because he knows that impinges very heavily on our operational requirements and that he now has done something which has affected us badly, and I would dismiss him. Well, that wasn't done during working hours because he got nicely drunk on the weekend. However, if he has an accident through no fault of his own and loses his eyesight, he can't drive anymore, then I would have to go through a different exercise, either retrench or incapacity, and it depends what I think is fairest for him. But of course, he will terminate. So we're now choosing the how, not the why. And you've got, every time you have a labor case, you've got the how and you've got the why. The why must be good. It must be rock solid. In other words, the merits of what you're doing. The how is a more amorphous exercise. And we haven't been given any instructions yet from either the Department of Health, the Department of Labor, or from our courts as to the how. And so I'm trying to lean on some experience, a little bit of experience I've had in the labor law as to how one would do it. And I'm giving people nuanced answers in accordance with the actual case itself. And I strongly believe that we need to lean back at this stage and say, we have to terminate, but what's the fairest for the employee in those circumstances? Thank you.
Thank you. Please confirm that if we insist on vaccinating, do we have to provide or pay for transport to vaccination site?
Yeah, also a very difficult one, and thank you for that question. And I've had that question a few times. I've been giving the answer saying, yes, I believe that you should actually do two things. First of all, give people time off and still pay them. In other words, don't take it off their sick leave or their normal leave. That's the first thing. The second thing is many staff don't have all that extra spare cash to go off to wherever they're going to have the vaccination. And now it's become quick and easy. So most of my clients now are putting people together in transport, they're hiring a bus or the company transport, and actually taking them to the site, or they're saying, we'll give you a stipend to be able to get to the site yourself. And I think if you're putting it in your policy and it is a change of policy, it's only fair that you do that. That question can be extrapolated a little bit further, but what happens when someone comes in and says, I think I might have symptoms. I started coughing and sneezing. I had some symptoms, but I haven't got money to pay for the COVID-19 test. And yet it would take me a long time to get a test done, and I'm not gonna do it. I'm just gonna go home and relax. I'm telling employers actually go and pay for the test. Now, I think it's getting a bit cheaper. Maybe the doctors online over here can tell us, but it's getting quite cheap now. One employer said he was able to get the test done, the proper test, not the sham ones, at 450 Rand. It's probably worth it that you would pay for that particular staff member to be tested. What you don't want is you don't want them hanging around your office in any event. I'll tell them certainly not to come in and to stay away as long as possible. But I also would like to know whether they actually were positive when they were in, so that I could then warn everyone else that they've been in contact with. And so it's actually a very good investment to actually go and pay for the test as well. Not only pay for the transport, pay for the test.
Thank you. There is talk in the media about government looking at making vaccinations compulsory. Where are we with this process?
Well, we haven't got anywhere as yet because it hasn't been presented to Parliament, and the only way you can make it compulsory is by presentation, unless one of the ministers, either health or labor, want to put it into regulations. And I think that's going to be, it's a little bit too emotional for that, but they are certainly talking about it. There is nothing in our law that stops you making it compulsory. For instance, when you have a notifiable disease, or COVID-19, to the best of my knowledge, isn't a notifiable disease as yet, although regulations say that you have to tell your employer and you must tell everyone else that you've been in touch with, but it's not a notifiable disease in the sense of the Department of Health. But they can do it. There's nothing in our law that stops government making it compulsory. But because it's so emotional and because it's such a hot debate, and because the president has on no less than 3 occasions said you don't have to have it, I think that's going to have to reach the parliamentary floor, and then you know what happens over there. It gets bogged down. It's like walking through treacle, to quote Winnie the Pooh. It's just going to take ages to get there. So I think what they're doing is that the Department of Employment and Labor are regulating more and more, trying to make it as close to compulsory as possible. And they're treading very carefully in making it. So the latest regulations do actually tell us that you have to go through the exercise to make sure that your staff are healthy. And people are interpreting that very strongly in line with the fact that you must be vaccinated. And then when you say, I mean, there's also going to be a big, and I'm waiting for this, I haven't had a case yet, but there's going to be a big industry in making sham certificates, vaccination certificates. Very easy to, I mean, I've got a little piece of, a little square, I don't know if anyone else has got this little square of paper that I keep in my wallet that says I've been vaccinated, where almost I shouldn't say it, but I can't read what's written on it. The nurse who wrote on it hasn't got a great handwriting, and I don't think she knew what she was doing, quite frankly. A wonderful woman who vaccinated me very nicely. I didn't have any bad feelings afterwards, but when I read the little card for the first and the second one, it's almost illegible. Now you can imagine there'll be a big industry to make those little cards saying, no, don't worry, I've been vaccinated. And then of course employers are saying, well, we want to test people afterwards to see if they got the antibodies. And there's going to be a big industry for that now. And there's going to be a big debate is, can you send your staff for antibody tests? And can you next year, when the vaccine runs out, well, not runs out, becomes less effective, can you send them again to have another vaccine next year? When is it going to be necessary to have the next one? Or like they're doing in Israel, you must have the third jab. I had a colleague, a labor lawyer in Tel Aviv, phoned me and he said he's had his third shot. I said, that's fantastic. How do you feel now? He said, no, shot of tequila. So, you know, people are, at the end of the day, people are now starting to look at the future. And maybe it's just not the 2 jabs that you're having. What about the third? What about next year? And what about whether you're going to check up to see if they've got a fake certificate or not? For years now, I've had many court cases, I'm very happy about this, where people present fake medical certificates for sick leave. So you can imagine what's going to happen. There'll be a lovely industry built up. I'm sure it's already built up in fake certificates to show that you're freshly vaccinated.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks for highlighting that fact. Is requesting this personal information during the hiring process not an infringement of the POPI Act?
No, it isn't. And it's because of your occupational health and safety requirements. You have to be sure that your staff are protected against future staff. And it certainly isn't a person can say, I'm not going to give you the information, but then it's your right to say, well, then I'm not going to give you a job. You can't force someone. You can't ask Michael Bagram if he's had the vaccination. And likewise, you can't force me to tell you about all my comorbidities when I'm coming. I don't have to. I can say, listen, that's my right. I'm not going to. And you say, well, that's cool. That's fine. And then you obviously disregard me when you are employing. So it'll be interesting. I tell you, I will give you one interesting example, which gave me a little bit of a fright, but I didn't mind, and I'm quite happy to announce I'm diabetic. I had a person from Parliament right at the beginning of all this COVID-19 phoned me and saying that obviously you can't come in because you've got comorbidities. Now, I've not told anyone in Parliament that I've got comorbidities, and they said, you can't come in. And I said, well, that's fine. But just as a matter of interest, who said I've got comorbidities? No, they know, we know. Well, obviously, they run our medical act. And never mind the POPI Act, they then accessed everyone's medical records and had a look at it and see who's got comorbidities, who hasn't. And they can see that I take sugar medication twice a day. And they then started phoning people and saying, listen, this is, instead of just sending out a message to everyone saying, if you've got a comorbidity, please don't come in. This was right in the beginning, even before the lockdown actually occurred. It was, I think it was the end of February at the time, February 2020. I was only too pleased not to go in because it gave me more time in my office. But I wasn't thinking, I was thinking that's a strange disease in China. I don't know why they're phoning me about this. I'm not even Chinese. But then they did tell me, and then I had that interesting debate with my caucus saying, how come they're busy accessing our medical aid? I don't think they're doing that anymore, because I did complain, not that I care about myself, but imagine if I had AIDS. I wouldn't be that keen for everyone to go talking about it.
Absolutely, 100%. Isn't it going to become very onerous and time consuming to manage boosters?
Well, I don't know. I've got no idea. No, I don't think so. I have a flu vaccination once a year. I've had 2 vaccinations for pneumonia. I get pneumonia occasionally. So I've had vaccinations. It's not an issue. You can go on a time off when you're on holiday, or when I don't think there's a problem with that, but maybe the medical people can tell us. But from what I understand, in Israel, the third vaccination has gone very well and very easy and quick. In the beginning in South Africa, when you went to have your first, when I had my first vaccination, I spent half the bloody day. Sorry about swearing, but I was really angry sitting there half a day in a queue waiting to have a vaccination when they could have actually just organized it properly. But now it is organized properly and you don't. My second one, my biggest stay was the 15 minutes where they wanted me to eat biscuits. I'm not sure why you got biscuits, but I got biscuits where I was. Maybe they were looking to see if I fell over. The bottom line is, I don't think it's going to be an issue, no.
Okay, thank you. This is a very interesting question around the freelance space. This lady says she has a business where we employ a large number of freelancers per project. The freelancers are reluctant to reveal their vaccine status. Can she insist, and can they put this on as a condition of their employment?
Yeah, even with freelancers, nothing changes. And in fact, I know a lot of businesses, and especially in some of the bigger industries like building, for instance, or engineering, they use freelancers on a mass scale. In other words, they go out and get 50 freelancers a day or 200 or whatever. They should actually be getting a contract anyway. Everyone's entitled to a contract. And if you're taking even them on a daily basis, you have to give them a new Roniad-off contract every day. And I would put it in the contract that you want them to be vaccinated, especially if they're working together in teams. Because again, you still have the occupational health and safety requirements. And that requirement is quite clear, that you need to assure everyone else that you will run a safe operation. Now, it's not entirely safe if you have a bunch of freelancers, say in a call center, you're all working together in a call center and you've got 500 people all sitting very close to each other, and half a dozen of them have not been vaccinated. Who knows what can be? It can be a real super spreader event coming to work. So yes, I think you can, and I would strongly suggest that you put it in. And if they don't want to reveal it, well, then you don't take them. Employment is still very dear in South Africa. So you're not going to have a problem. Where problems do arise is where you need a particular skill and that person said, I won't be vaccinated. You've got to try and somehow structure it to make sure they don't get in touch with other people. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. As you explained at the start of your talk, certain rights are safeguarded in our Constitution insofar as vaccination choice. So how does force being any applied by an employee fit in with the Constitution, the Constitution's guarantee of rights? Sorry, yeah. I'm reading this.
Yeah, no, I understand the question, and I can explain it.
Thank you.
The question is that you've now got to weigh up the right of the individual to not be vaccinated, and that is a right, it's your constitutional right, against the rights of the group for health and safety. And you've got to weigh up those two issues. And look, lawyers do that all the time, so do philosophers. But from a practical point of view, as a labor lawyer, I'm telling you that the group right overrides the individual right to not be vaccinated. And that right is still kept intact, just that there's no right to a job then. That's the point. I'm still not forcing that person to take the vaccination. I had a horrible experience, and I might have told you just before we came on air, I had a horrible experience where I was on a radio station in Durban, interviewed me about this very topic. And a woman phoned me thereafter to shout and scream, saying that I can't force her to have a vaccination. And the more I try to explain, I'm not trying to force her to have the vaccination. All I'm saying is that then she can't force her boss to take her into the workplace. And it's his right. And of course, there's the right of, which I explained earlier, the right of the 14 against the 2 who refuse to be vaccinated. Again, why do you weigh it up? And let me tell you, rights are not absolute, even in our Constitution. Let me give you an example. You have a right of freedom of speech in this country, but you have no right while you're sitting in a crowded theater to shout fire, when everyone will then rush up and run out and half kill each other at the 2 exits that are available. All you're doing is you're overriding their right to bodily integrity and health and safety, because now they're all going to rush out and stamp on each other and 2 people will get killed in the process. You don't have that right of freedom of speech. And so the reality is that those rights have to be read in accordance with other rights, and certain rights have to be more applicable in the workplace than others. And so you've got to weigh it. It's a weighing up exercise. And that's why there is, in all our labor laws, there is that system of fairness. And you've got to weigh up fairness to the one, fairness to the other, and fairness to the group. And we are a social, we're social beings. And in fact, a lot of us work together. And if you're going to work together, I think the rights of the group will certainly override the rights of the individual. This is not like Boy Scouts, where the rights of the one are the rights of all. It doesn't work like that. We're not a wolf pack. What we are is we're social beings, and we do need to protect each other.
Thanks, Michael. Another question that comes to mind is, if your business doesn't provide medical aid for your employees, and you as the individual don't have medical aid, but the business, through their policy and what you've described earlier in your conversation, insists and encourages their employees to be vaccinated, then in that situation, what do you suggest? And also, if the employee actually can't afford to be vaccinated, how does one manage that situation?
Well, it's quite clear. I've been managing it on the basis, and everyone's asking, do we pay? That's the same as we pay for transport? Do we pay for the vaccination? Do we pay for the tests? Do we pay for ongoing booster shots thereafter? And I would suggest, yes, they must look at it as an overhead. And especially in cases where people don't have the medical aid and actually can't afford. And if someone's got symptoms, I would strongly believe that you would pay for that, first of all, to the test to see if they are positive. And then afterwards, when it comes to the vaccination, I would pay for their vaccination. These are not horrific expenses. I understand when you are recruiting large groups of people on the basis of casual labor. I've got a client that runs a call center, and they're forever bringing in 50 to 100 people a day, new people. That becomes prohibitive. But then you put it in your contract and you want to see their certificate. I've just got this supercilious feeling that a lot of people are going to arrive with these little square certificates in their wallets, and they're not real. And that's a problem. And it becomes impossible to test people when they actually come in. At the moment, I think those tests are going to become very, very cheap and very easy in the future. It's like when you test people for alcohol before you go into some workplaces. They do a breathalyzer. I think we're going to start coming out. I can imagine that we'll have breathalyzer tests for COVID-19 in the future.
Which leads me to the question that's just come directly through to me. Is there any way of checking vaccine card information on government websites or records?
People are telling me that it's not exactly run properly here, which is probably typical of any government in the world. Probably in Switzerland, you'd be able to test it immediately. They are trying to capture most of those records, despite the fact that on my little card, they've got my ID wrong. They transposed 2 numbers. I went back to go and get it done properly. And then also, despite the fact that instead of M at the end of my name, they put an N, and they call me Mr. Bargain. I think you're going to have problems at the moment. They haven't got it properly done. I'm not sure how we're going to do it. Apparently, the only province, the Western province, is the only province that's got actual records, but I can't say they're perfect. So it's going to be very difficult at the moment. I don't know if any of the doctors online, if we've got a doctor, I know Solly's there, but they can tell us whether that website is up and running and actually working. I don't know, but maybe they can tell us. And it's an interesting one because I think people will, Solly says he's also got no idea. I think people will be cheating. And unfortunately, that happens to be the nature of society. After a few years practicing law, I suddenly discovered to my horror that some people lie. It happens.
And then, Michael, just a last question, which I think you have covered, but if you don't mind just maybe giving it a little bit more so that we have clarity before I close off. What happens if other employees complain about colleagues who do not want to vaccinate?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, you're working with people, you get on, you're a team, but you know that the person won't get vaccinated.
Yeah, look, that's a problem, and I did have that direct problem already where, as I said, 16 had gone off to be vaccinated, 2 refused to, and the others complained and said, we're not. The employer wasn't actually too fussed about it. He just thought he was doing a good deed by taking everyone off to be vaccinated. It was a bit peeved that 2 actually came with for the joyride and for the coffee and muffins that they all got, and then refused to be vaccinated. And he only found out when everyone got back on the bus. So he was a bit peeved about that, but he didn't think too much about it. He just thought that was a bit duplicitous of them. But the rest said, we're not going to work with him. And that's when he came to me, and we had to take action, and we had to dismiss. And that was a dismissal. We decided not to return because they just felt that they're not so lucky to have an injection, and so they just didn't have it. People are still a little bit scared, and especially when they don't know what it's all about, and they might never have had an injection in the past. And maybe it's not so lucky, but it's nice to have the coffee and the muffin and the joyride and not work. But I think we're going to have more of that. I had a funny example where, maybe not so funny, but one employee called his boss a vaccination Nazi. We insisted that everyone has to go. He doesn't care what their problems are, and he refused to discuss it with them. And he said, everyone has to go and present me with, before they come back, they must present me with a certificate. So one employee called him a vaccination Nazi, and that led to a bit of a disciplinary inquiry, and he apologized. We all got on well afterwards. But the reality is we're going to have a lot of emotion over the next few months about this, because let's face it, if you're running a business and you are interacting with the public are probably going to want to know, whatever their feelings are about vaccination or not, they probably want to know that when they go into that workplace to do whatever business they're going to do there, that they're not going to catch something from the staff that are helping them. Mm-hmm. They're probably going to want to know that. And I think we're going to see more and more of that in the future as we go down the road, now that the vaccination is actually so freely available. And also there are a lot of people who are just not having. So the anti-vaxxer crowd is enormous, and it's becoming a problem. Thank you.
Michael, thank you so much. You are incredibly generous with your time and sharing your unbelievable knowledge and expertise with us. And we are enormously grateful for this, and that you are always open to run these webinars for us and just give clarity to the businesses that are on the call. So on behalf of ORT and ORT SA Cape, thank you for this morning. And for everyone else that has joined us, I'm sure you found Michael's conversation incredibly beneficial and valuable. And I hope it helps you in your own businesses. So thank you, keep safe, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one.
Thank you very much for hosting.